Hi, I'm Mike Seymour, and welcome to this FX podcast. I'm standing in this week for John, who's traveling. Okay, so on the episode this week, I'm talking to Chris Maclean, who is the VFX Supervisor and second unit director of Foundation, the Apple TV Plus show that is just dynamite. I loved this show tremendously, so it's a real treat to talk to Chris. But if you're listening to just the podcast audio version of this, you should note that on YouTube, there's also the video version of our interview, which features, in addition to the rest of everything else we're going to be discussing, a whole lot of behind-the-scenes shots and making of footage overlaid over our interview. But either way, we hope you enjoy it as much as we did making it. And I'll cross now to Chris discussing season 2 of the smash hit Foundation.
I want to tell you something. A long time ago, a man showed me how to predict the future. Our foundation to save humanity was born.
In my empire, there's a natural order. The Foundation is a threat to me.
We will destroy them all.
If there's war,
We shall win.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, I think we first spoke when you were doing Ben-Hur. Am I right in thinking that? It was a while ago, right? You were at Mr. X back then.
Yeah, it would have been Ben-Hur, and then I think I saw you at WonderCon. I don't know. It was a long time ago.
A while ago, yeah.
A long run. Yeah.
Yeah, but
back when my beard was less gray.
Hey, so I want to start with a quote that you said, so you could maybe I could get you to unpack it a bit. You said a little while ago, we kind of live in Candy Mountain on Foundation because the visual effects have such an important role in the show. Our most important job is to make sure everybody doesn't pay attention to what we're doing. And what did you mean by all of that?
So, well, there's two things there, I guess. Candy Mountain, as living on Candy Mountain on Foundation, basically just means that we've built such a great rapport with the rest of the production and our studio. They trust my team and I to kind of take it home and listen to us in terms of our involvement in the show. But also, we tend to get, in the industry, we tend to have a bad time sometimes, and we don't have a bad time on this show. We have a seat at the table, as they say. And the second part of that, not paying attention to what we do, in that, we're storytellers. Anybody who's in film wants to tell a good story, and we want to keep everybody in the story without them, losing track of what's going on. So if people are looking at the show and going, "Oh, that's a great story," and not saying, "Oh, look at those visual effects," then that's good. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah, you kind of failed in the first ep of this season at the first sort of opening setup where you have the assassination attempt, because, boy, what some great visual effects that were, like slicing a head in part, and that whole sequence was just a cracker. Yeah,
I mean, for visual effects people, it's great. But when I'm saying people shouldn't be
no, I understand. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. But let's face it, right? Like I wasn't imagining you actually sliced the actress's head in half. So I couldn't help but think, wow, that's some good visual effects. As much as I was on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, we tend to take her apart and put her back together a lot in the show. So she's been very patient with us with all the things we ask her to put on and deal with. So kudos to her for helping us out as much as she does.
Yeah. So that was Outpost, was it? VFX that did that for you?
Yeah. Outpost is the Demerzel vendor for all of our Demerzel sequences. So,
but you actually worked with a lot of vendors this season, didn't you?
Yeah, we Frame Store, Rodeo, Crafty Apes, Outpost as well. Macrovision, who's now Accenture Song. Not as many as season one. Season one, we had to pull in quite a few more vendors because of COVID and the kind of lack. There was a lot of attrition during that time, so we had to get a lot of bring in a lot more, like Rocket Science and a few others to help us out.
So you have a lot of variation, obviously huge variation in the type of visual effects work you're doing. I mean, there are some amazing space battles. Clearly, we're going to have some spoilers, but if somebody hasn't seen the season now, they're remiss, and I'm not going to cut them any slack. So let's assume everyone's seen it. They're a huge space, I mean, epic space battle, especially at the end of the season. Then you've got these very personal moments, but are quite obviously like dramatic visual effects. And then there was a whole class of really subtle stuff going on, especially with the mind tricks and the psychic dampeners and all that kind of stuff. Is the work allocated by you based on teams' ability to do a particular type of work, or are you going for like, well, these are my guys and I need to work out how I can allocate the work to get it done?
No, most of what I do is based on the teams and the vendor and what that team is good at. I have a rule. I don't hire vendors based on their name. I hire based on the team that they have. So I like to have a little bit of I like to have a working relationship with the VFX soup at that vendor, and be able to talk to their team and kind of have that relationship, because when things start to get hairy towards the end, when we're delivering everything and everything else, I want to be able to have a strong, be able to trust them to take it home, and that's a big part of my philosophy, and why I think we have a lot more fun on the show is because there's no one on the show who doesn't want to be on the show. So
yeah, so some of these things are not Easter eggs, but they're like visual design elements that are laid in episodes that don't get a payoff until later. I'll go back to that idea of what was happening with the whole kind of mind trick stuff. Like that was a subtle chromatic aberration thing that seemed to be going on. We didn't kind of notice it at first, and then we were kind of thinking, are you guys just getting arty? And then, of course, it played out that what we were looking at had been influenced the whole time. How much do you have the entire season mapped out so that you can do that? Because if you were just doing it on episode by episode, you wouldn't really know the significance necessarily to sort of plan all that stuff in.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time planning and looking at places to create a visual language for the show. That was one that we talked about very early on. We actually had a set of detune lenses that we shot some of those sequences with. Sometimes things get lost in the weeds when we're doing that sort of thing, but for the most part, we were able to maintain that look throughout the season. And then what we did is, when we wanted to amp up those situations, or if the director forgot to shoot with those lenses or whatever, we then went back in and did we had a script built in Nuke that we could give to the vendors to just put on top of that, those shots we wanted to affect. So, but yeah.
So you've mapped out the season, and I'm by no means asking about upcoming seasons, but to the same level in this season, obviously we saw the Mural, and there are obviously things that are likely to come back. But leaving away the specifics for a second, do you have the same mapping over multiple seasons that to set those kind of visual language things up, or is it really just contained inside the season as far as how far you're can sort of view that visual design language?
No, it's mapped across everything. So
oh, really?
We make sure that we know, if we know something is coming up or some big feature is coming up, we make sure to know what we're going to do with it. Just because we want to we want to respect what's going on and try to, a lot of times the writers will throw us curveballs, and come up or write something that doesn't necessarily follow the rules, and we have to try to either tell them to fix it or come up with a new way of describing it, but visually. But they tend to play ball most of the time.
So looking backwards then to season 1 to 2, like we see what's going on inside the vault, starting obviously at the very beginning of this season. So you had a good idea what the vault was going to play out like from day one, effectively?
Effectively, yes. We had, Rory, our production designer, and I worked together closely on all of that. And then the only thing that really changed was how dark the interior of the vault became, or the interior of the prime radiant became. We were going to do it with the kind of glass and gold of the prime radiant, but we ended up wanting to go a little bit more black light painting with it, I guess you could say, with the neon and it ended up being LED strips and mirrors, but that was we had a very good idea of how it was all going to work and how it was going to come together. And Arnaud from Rodeo actually helped us out quite a bit early on, designing all of that sort of thing. But no, the design language of the black vault to the gold and glass we knew that was going to happen once we had designed the prime radiant for season 1. We knew that we wanted to show that those two things were connected, or the technology that Harry had used to build the prime radiant and then turn himself into the vault were similar. So that's.
And then you've got some really original stuff this season. I'm thinking in particular of Demerzel's origin story, Cleon the First, the sort of imprisonment stuff, which is spectacular visuals, but must have been pretty, well, I don't know. I would have found that intimidating had I seen that in the script before it was visualized. That's a really unique sequence.
Yeah, that was one that developed a little bit later. We knew that we wanted to show that we had to keep her separated in order to keep her in prison. So, because we learned in season 1 that she could regenerate parts of her body and regenerate herself. So it became, and we kind of foreshadowed that when she cut her head off in the fight, and then it grew back when she was repairing herself. So that was, we kind of riffed off of that to design the prison, where we had her in 6 different slices. We had originally wanted to do 100 slices, but in the space that we had, and visually it just became more, I don't want to say economic, but more elegant to keep her in those 6 slices that we had.
I was going to say, was that reference of some kind of Damien Hirst kind of modern art piece, or was it just, I mean, it's just me bringing that to the...
Tarsum, the cell, the horse. When she goes into the dream phase, and the horse is standing in the room, and the glass comes down, and the horse spreads apart, but it's still alive. That's actually where we got that reference from. But no, but it is part of that. I mean, that's where that's where Tarsum got that idea from. So is the Hearst the kind of shark?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Was it a discovery process I mean, you said it started out as hundreds, it ended up as 6. It was incredibly effective, but was it a discovery process both visually and technically, or did you have a clear idea how you're going to pull that off from the outset?
It was there were a lot of concepts floating around for that. Rory did take the lead on that, because we try to do some version of whatever practical effect we're trying to do on the show. So we knew that he was going to have to make something that the actors could interact with, and then we would then take it over when we had to put Demerzel back together and that sort of thing. But no, it was something that that developed over time, based off of many iterations. The only thing that I can kind of in terms of movie lore, the only thing that I can kind of compare it to is watching them try to design the Tesseract in Interstellar. So that it kind of did take that long, where it wasn't until the last kind of 3 months that we knew exactly what was going to happen with that. But it did the last 3 months of shooting. But we went through quite a few iterations. There were a lot of desktop models and things built, and setting her in the space and all of that sort of thing, because the space that they're in the prison is actually just as important as as Demerzel's slicing, in terms of that room and how Cleon the First kind of learns about Demerzel. So
Yeah, because I guess when we're watching these things, you see these enormous rings around the planet, right, which has replaced the space elevator from season 1. And because of the scale of those shots, or maybe the end sequence where they attack the Invictus ship, these are like magnificent, big production value shots. It's hard not to think that they're the hardest shots, but I'm guessing maybe, are they a more understood genre of shots? What is the sort of harder stuff for you to map out on a season, typically?
It depends. Those are actually easier because without tooting our own horn, the VFX team has full control over most of that stuff.
It's a fully digital shot.
We worked with David a lot on those shots, but most of the time we would just do our blocking, show it to him, and he would think it was cool, and we'd move forward. But if a director or a DP does something that doesn't lend itself to the visual effect, that can hurt us. Obviously, we would have liked to have had different types of shots for Demerzel coming back together, but we were, given a certain set of plates, and we asked for certain things, and things weren't actually, the way that we had talked about them. So we had to, and in that way, those shots are more difficult because we then have to try to retcon or reverse engineer the shot in a way that makes it still coherent or you can still tell what's supposed to happen in the shot.
Because I mean, there are some big environment work, and I'm thinking of that shot where they're on the stage and there's attack on day, and it's tragic for a number of reasons. But as I understand it, you shot that just in a car park, right? So like you're basically putting in the rest of everything, building out around the actors.
I think if are you talking about the attack where the Whisper ship jumps into the and saves Constant? Yeah, so that was shot,
and we lose a beloved creature in the process.
yeah, Becky. But yeah, no, that was shot at the Opera in Tenerife in the Canary Islands. They have a big platform facing the ocean that you can go watch the sunset and do all that stuff that we took over for that, and then integrated into the palace. But yeah, all of that it's a huge amount of work. But as we get into big shots like that and big sequences like that, we kind of show everybody the concept art and say, this is what we're going to put out here. This is your stage. These are the rules of what we're dealing with here, in terms of how you can shoot, what directions you can shoot in. We tend to listen to the DPs when they say they want to shoot south because it helps them out, all that sort of thing. And then the directors, we do have good directors. They do, 80% of the time they listen to us. So, they give us what we need. But
well, some of those directors are actually ex-actors with pretty serious sci-fi experience themselves, right?
Roxanne was a Klingon, on Voyager. So
yes, she's known her fair share of green screens, I'm sure.
Yeah, which we don't use a lot of on this show.
But getting back to that sequence that we're talking about, so that seems to be one where you're going to have a lot of lighting and a lot of aspects dictated to you by the plate elements. You don't have the 100% CG. You are having to work in and around and blend seamlessly as you did. Quite a pretty complex scene.
Yeah. No, I mean, the lighting was mostly, cinema verte, or, what was there was the lighting. So, aside from, some negs or a little bit of fill here and there, but part of it was, shooting with real smoke, shooting with atmosphere, which helps us out a lot in terms of blending. It's kind of like the reverse of the old days when everybody shot with no atmosphere. They wanted clean plates for everything. We tend to be a lot messier on the show because it kind of grounds us in reality more, and it's easier for not easier for the artist, but it's easier for us to make it look and more believable if we ground it with that. So we tend to, when it comes to lighting and what the directors give us, we tell them to light it as if we're not going to do anything, and then we tell them whether or not it's going to work for us. But that's kind of the rule on the show, is not to let visual effects get in the way of making a nice shot or making a good sequence. So
yeah. So I had a question for you. In the show, full stop, like whichever season we're in, there is obviously periods where we're jumping between different points in time. So we're seeing, and of course, a central point of this is that Dawn, Day, and Dusk are the same actors because they're clones. So it's obviously the case. It feels like Lee Pace, in particular, does a really good job at letting us know from his acting which version of him he is. Was there ever any discussion about producing any kind of differences on them so that the audience would be able to read that? Or was it always going to be down to the skill of the actors so that I, the audience, would not be confused as to kind of which version of whichever clone I was looking at?
Obviously, there was some discussion about, changing them up a little bit in terms of their costumes or maybe their hair. But it was never like, let's give them a scar or a birthmark or a tattoo or anything like that. It really did come down to the skill of the actor for 80% of it, in terms of their ability to shift and change their change their performance to suit the new version of whoever they were playing. And we've seen actors like Cassian, who plays Dawn. He's grown a lot. And, Terry, who plays Dusk, he's an old hat at this sort of stuff. So he's kind of used to having to mold himself into different characters. And Lee has done a really good job as well. So, the difference between, because in season one, Lee played, I think, 3 or 4 different versions of himself. So, to go from, a naive version of Dawn who's becoming Day to a Day who's 3 or 4 versions past the one that he was just playing, and being able to switch. Because sometimes, we would crossboard and shoot on based on location instead of shooting per scene or per in continuity order. So he'd have to go from one to the other, on the same day sometimes, which was, a testament to his ability to act and do that.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, obviously, we hope that the show will go on for season after season after season. But at some point, you'll hit the same problem that Star Trek did with Data, which is the actor has aged, but they're not meant to age, because the whole point of it is they're not meant to age, right? By that stage, maybe your team will have to come up with some further innovations. But it's. The actors do a remarkable job in providing that. But you must have the same problem that they have to deal with. I mean, they're trying to keep track of their character, but you're having to keep track of an enormous amount of sort of I guess, visual language, visual continuity, because things are changing over the time of the shows, multiple generations of characters. And I'm just thinking now of the mural, for example, on the wall, and that plays a significant role in this season. We've seen it in previous seasons. Like, all of these things have to both be continuous, but also date appropriately, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the mural, we have to have, the mural is basically a continuation or a visual history of everything that's happened in the show. So, and Dusk, we had Dusk the painter in season 1, but there is always somebody there to record the history of everything in the Empire and paints it into the Mural of Souls. But visually, the style of that, we do go from like, I want to say we had a bit more of a comic book style in season 1, which was like the new age for that. But then we go back in time in season 2 and look at older art, which has a little bit more of a deco feel. And that's something that Rory is very interested in, is tracking art movements or the reoccurrence of art movements through time, and using that as a way to kind of say, we've gone from this time to a different time. It's the same as us. If we look at going from Victorian to Nouveau to Deco, to postmodernism, or whatever you want to talk, whatever way you want to look at it. But yeah, that's really it. We just look at our own history and try to play off of that, because one of the themes in the show is that humanity doesn't really change that much, but the way we look at the world does, and what we want to see does.
Are you doing subtle things with Trantor, the actual planet, or the cities on the planet, in the same architectural way?
Yeah, of course. We when you're on the surface, we're in kind of a scarpal world, and as you go down into the different layers of Trantor, we change and kind of go back in time or forward in time if we feel like if we feel like it suits the story, like the Desnian sector, where we find Azura in season 1, when Dawn kind of chases her down into the bowels of Trantor. We wanted a bit more of an inner city feel, or a bit more of a kind of 80s New York feel to that. Of course, with a little bit more space or sci-fi fun. So we had these spheres that Rory likes blowing up balloons and putting them all over our sets. So and then we have to try to replicate them. But we had these kind of big spheres that showed up in on set. So we ended up having to duplicate that and make that part of the world. So it was yeah. I mean, obviously we did that with Trantor. The time difference between season 1 and season 2, where we see the Starbridge fall and then the giant rings around the planet, as well as part of that, where we wanted to show that we've kind of hit the peak of Empire technology, because basically the rings, if you look at them, are just bigger versions of the Starbridge. They didn't really do anything different. They just made the Starbridge bigger. So there was no real new technology involved with that, and that was kind of what we were trying to say. Like the sandograms, the technology that they use for their holograms hasn't changed, hasn't gotten better. Everybody's still kind of using that stuff, and then we start to see towards the end of the season, we start to see Foundation developing better technology, newer technology, and we start to see that kind of shift. It's kind of like the AI shift we're having right now, where we're all going to pay close attention to what's going on there if we want to keep our jobs, sort of thing.
Because there's a lot of shift in Terminus, isn't there? Like,
Yeah, there's like as Empire is stagnating, Terminus is accelerating technologically. So they've been able to figure out how to with the technology from and this is part of at the end of season one, Anacreon and Thespis coming together with Terminus to kind of create the Outer Reach foundation or new foundation. Where they kind of come together with their different technology and start to move forward. So with and having the Invictus, which is the old ship, one of the first jump ships from Empire, they've been able to reverse engineer and incorporate all this technology to create the Whisper ships, which are able to jump without spacers, which is where Hober Mallow comes in and kind of messes with Empire, because Empire still needs spacers to jump.
Yeah, it's a big plot point. Yeah.
And once the spacers are free, they no longer need Empire, because Terminus has been able to synthesize the opalesque that they need to survive as they've become android or cyborgs, basically.
They're really interesting characters. There are a bunch of interesting. Is this a season that you felt like, looking back, was characterized by the fact that you had more character work? Because it felt like there was a bit more character work in sort of some of the flashbacks and also beloved pets that got killed.
Becky was a huge creature for us. Laureline and Laurent did a great job at Framestore on Becky. But no,
Becky, by the way, for those that are listening, is the startlingly dangerous creature that I'm referring to as the friendly pet. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, she's a domesticated bishop's claw from Terminus.
Yes,
we saw them in season one as wild animals, and then we kind of took the idea of how humans domesticated dogs over tens of thousands of years and said, well, what if we sped up that process and domesticated them over 200 years, and now we've got a rideable cat, battle cat version of Bishop's Claw. So that whole process and figuring out how to do that. Again, we had our stuntman Chris, nice man. He got hired to play Becky, so we had him running around in a great gimp suit with a giant Becky head on set all the time, and that was great. But she was a character. Becky was a character that we needed everybody to be able to interact with, and everybody had a soft spot for Chris, aka Becky. Wandering around set and helping everybody visualize what was going to happen, and it was a great experience. And then the spacers, we went full CG on season one, but then season two we realized that we were going to have to there was a lot more interaction with them, and they had to play a larger role, so we ended up doing a hybrid approach where we kept the actors mouths and parts of their performance, and then
because they really had subtext in this, didn't they? I mean, they was important for the audience to understand what they were saying and what they were actually thinking, being two completely different things, as all good subtext is. So there was a need to not lose performance as much as there was to enhance the performance.
Yeah, it was we had to make them feel inhuman, or make them feel like evolved humans, but also maintain the emotional characteristics of what they were doing. They're
effectively enslaved, so we had to empathize with them pretty hard.
And that was and that, like, when talking process with Christian at Image Engine, they came up with a nice hybrid approach of CG replacement for some of it, but maintaining almost all of the performance and all of the movement, because we did shoot. We did create an anti-gravity space on set with wires and mats and all sorts of stuff to keep everybody safe. But there's a big stunt component to everything we were doing with the spacers, and shooting reference and making sure that everything felt grounded. And that's part of what we do on the show is making sure that we're not just making stuff up or saying that we're going to figure it out later. We always figure out a way to shoot something or get some reference so that when it comes time to do the visual effect, there's some basis, real world basis for what we're working from.
Yeah, that's normally borne out in the shooting ratio. Like, in other words, how much of your stuff you do, it gets dropped in the cutting room floor. How efficient are you guys in terms of, like, doesn't sound like you're shooting a lot of stuff that you're working on and then cutting out. You seem to have a fairly tight, for a massive show, you have a very tight production cycle.
Yeah, we don't mess around when it comes to that. We don't spend money. We try not to spend money foolishly. And we because as soon as you start making mistakes or you start doing things that are secondary visual effects or cost a lot of money, like if a costume isn't working, or you shoot off a set, or or there's something in shot that you missed, and they keep shooting it. We try not to do a lot of that, and we tend to, and as boring as it is, it's talking to the producers and going, look, we can do all of this stuff in visual effects. We can do anything you want in visual effects now. There's no with enough time and money, we can do whatever you want. But the question is, should we? And is there a better way to do it, or a more efficient way to do it by doing it in camera? So
yeah, if you're just fixing something that could have otherwise been fixed, you're not getting production value. You're just basically repairing things that would otherwise be there naturally. I can see that would be a huge difference.
Fixing lazy shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that comes down to faith, doesn't it? It comes down to really good faith between the all parties, that you're not going to ask for things that you don't need, and similarly, they're going to give you stuff when you say, "Hey, I really need this," and let's not roll on. Let's keep going and stop and go back and fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like in terms of building that relationship with the production. Season 1 was where we cut our teeth on process, and my having worked on shows where we are a secondary thought in the eye of the producers, and we're our department is just there to clean up their mess after they've spent all the money and we're
and
now
it's not worked.
We're now the only ones left. We tend, like, and part of that was like Rory and I worked together on American Gods and developed a good working relationship. And us coming onto the show, we were the third and fourth hires on the show, aside from Michael Malone and David Goyer. So we early on scouting, working through the process, and David trusting us to really develop the kind of pipeline for the show when it came to visual effects.
I get the impression from hearing David talk that he really likes visual effects. I don't know, that's just the impression you get.
100%. I mean, yeah, he came on a Corridor Crew with me, to talk about it. He loves the he loves that part of the storytelling. I mean, he's a bit of a nerd like I am, in that way. So, he loves every part of filmmaking, and I think that's part of why we get along. But he also respects the process and knows how much we contribute to a show like Foundation. Like, there's tons of shows where we're not as big a part or as important to the process, but on a show like this where we're creating everything and reimagining a world or creating worlds, it's important for us to have that relationship with the production. So
yeah, I mean, I got to say, as much as I'd like to remain professional at this point and act like I'm all cool, I think your show is frigging brilliant. Like, I adore it. I mean, like, it's like my must-see TV. I relish in the fact that it can take a second viewing, because there are so many of these layered aspects that we've been talking about tonight that just you really do appreciate when you know what's coming now, because second or third viewing, you're like, oh, okay, look what they were doing there. That was clever. So yeah, no, it is really good.
Coming from you, that's a great compliment. So
well, long may you continue working hard and outputting, because I'm one of many that are very keen to continue watching. So look, congratulations on the show. Obviously, I'm super enthusiastic that you could take time out of a busy schedule to talk to us about the season. I think it's great, especially going into Emmy season. I hope you guys get incredibly well rewarded for all the hard work, and all of the vendors that have been working with you.
I appreciate that, and thank you for having me on, and taking the time to talk to us, because we love to talk about the show and get everybody jazzed about it. So
yeah. It's spectacularly good visual effects in service of a really good story. So yeah, it's everything you want. So great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks.
Okay, well, huge thanks to Chris for doing that, and big sort of hello to John, who's probably listening to this as he's traveling. John will be back next week. Coming up on the FX podcast, we actually have a real treat, an in-depth dive into the work and I guess artistic interpretation and no, stop that. Start again. Thanks so much to Chris for doing that. John will be back next week, and I should point out we have a really great episode coming up with Paul Debevic. Paul's a great friend of FX Guide, and we're going to do an in-depth look as he celebrates the anniversary of his groundbreaking Fiat Lux, as well as another anniversary for his Parthenon film, and finally a third anniversary for his recording or volumetric capture of President Obama. That's a 25-year, a 20-year, and a 10-year anniversaries all falling at the same time. We thought, what better excuse to sit down with Paul and discuss not only the technology, but some of the motivation behind why he did those. But as I say, that's coming up in a future ep. Until next time, I'm Mike Seymour. On behalf of myself and John, and everyone here at FX Guide, see you next time.